The downtown harbor grill buzzed like it always did on a Friday night. Plates clattering, orders flying, the sharp sizzle of oil hitting hot steel. But behind the swinging kitchen doors, things were falling apart. Mateo stood at the grill station, sweat soaking through his shirt, eyes locked on the searing pans in front of him. His hands moved fast, but not fast enough. The ticket printer hadn't stopped spitting out orders since 6 o'clock, and now at nearly 9, the line was backed up like a traffic jam. He flipped a salmon fillet, but his timing was off. Again. The edges blackened before he could pull it. He cursed under his breath and tossed it into the bin. That was the third one. "Mateo!" the sous chef barked from across the line. "Table 12's been waiting 20 minutes. What's happening?" I know. Mateo muttered, already reaching for another fillet. His voice was tight, strained. He hadn't slept much the past few nights. Between double shifts and the rent due on his sister's medical bills, rest felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. And then there was the silence from home, the empty chair at the kitchen table where his mom used to sit before the accident. He hadn't told anyone at work. Didn't want pity, just wanted to get through the shift. But tonight, it was all catching up. His hands trembled slightly as he seasoned the new piece of fish. The kitchen lights felt too bright, the noise too loud. Someone dropped a metal pan behind him. Clang. And he flinched hard enough to nearly knock over a stack of plates. That's when he saw it. The manager walking toward him with that look. The one that said, "We need to talk after service." Mateo's stomach dropped. He knew what that meant. Another warning. Maybe his last. He couldn't take it. Not right then. Without a word, he yanked off his apron, tossed it on the counter, and pushed through the back door into the alley. Cold night air hit his face like a splash of water. He leaned against the brick wall, breathing hard, trying to steady himself. The city hummed around him. Distant sirens, a bus rumbling down the street, laughter from a nearby bar. But he felt completely alone. He didn't hear the footsteps at first. When he finally looked up, there was a man standing a few feet away holding a mop bucket and a worn-out thermos. It was the night janitor, the quiet guy who always showed up around 10, long after the dinner rush. Mateo had seen him around for months but never really talked to him. The man had salt and pepper hair, tired eyes, and hands that looked like they'd worked a lifetime of hard jobs. He didn't say anything at first, just unscrewed the thermos lid and poured steaming black coffee into the cap. Then he walked over and held it out. Mateo hesitated. I'm not supposed to be out here." "Neither am I," the janitor said with a small, knowing smile. "But sometimes you gotta step out to step back in." Mateo took the coffee. It was strong, bitter, perfect. He took a slow sip, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. "You having a rough one?" the janitor asked, leaning against the dumpster, not looking at him, just giving him space. "Yeah," Mateo admitted, voice low. "Feels like everything's falling apart. Like no matter how hard I try, it's never enough." The janitor nodded like he'd heard that before, maybe 100 times. "You know," he said after a pause, "I used to think the same thing. Back when I was working construction, long days, sore back, empty fridge, felt like the world didn't care if I showed up or not." "What changed?" "I realized it wasn't about the world caring," the janitor said, glancing at him now. "It was about me caring, for myself, for the people around me. Even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." Mateo looked down at his boots, scuffed and stained with kitchen grease. I don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," the janitor said simply. "Not if you keep showing up, even on nights like this." They stood in silence for a minute, the steam from the coffee curling into the cold air. Somewhere down the street, a saxophone played softly from an open window. Then the janitor reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean kitchen towel, folded neatly like he'd been saving it. "Here," he said, handing it over. "Your apron's probably soaked through by now." Mateo took it, surprised. "You carry extras?" "Learned a long time ago," the janitor said with a shrug. People forget things, spill things, break things. But a clean towel? That's something you can always give. Mateo looked at the towel, then back at the man. There was something about him. Not just kindness, but calm. Like he'd seen storms before and knew they always passed. Thanks, Mateo said, and for the first time all night he meant it. The janitor nodded. You gonna go back in? Mateo took a deep breath. Thought about the tickets piling up, the manager's disappointed face, the rent due next week. But then he thought about the coffee, the towel, the quiet strength in this stranger's voice. Yeah, he said. I think I am. He pushed off the wall, straightened his shoulders, and headed for the door. Just before he went in, he turned back. Hey, what's your name? The janitor gave that same small smile. Call me Elias, Mateo. Good to meet you, Mateo. And with that, Mateo stepped back into the heat and noise of the kitchen. Not fixed, not magically okay, but a little lighter. He tied the clean towel around his waist like a promise. Inside, the printer was still going. The orders hadn't stopped. But this time, when he picked up his tongs, his hands didn't shake. Elias watched him go, then picked up his mop bucket and got back to work. He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. What neither of them knew yet was that this small moment in a cold alley would ripple far beyond that night, changing not just Mateo's path, but the fate of the entire restaurant. But for now, there was just the work, the coffee, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the people who seem the least important are the ones holding everything together. Mateo didn't expect to see Elias again so soon, but the next night there he was, mopping near the dish pit just after closing, whistling softly under his breath like he had all the time in the world. Mateo was scrubbing down his station, muscles aching, when he noticed a fresh roll of kitchen towels sitting neatly on the counter beside him. No note, no fanfare, just there like it had always belonged. He glanced toward the back. Elias gave a small nod and kept mopping. It happened again the night after that. This time it was a pair of thick rubber gloves left by the sink. Mateo's old ones had split at the thumb and his hands had been raw from hot water and detergent. He didn't say anything, but the next time Elias passed by, Mateo gave him a quiet thanks. Elias just smiled like it was nothing, but it wasn't nothing. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Mateo started looking forward to those quiet moments. The kitchen was still chaotic, the tickets still piled up, and the manager still hovered like a storm cloud. But now there was this steady presence in the background. Someone who didn't ask for anything, didn't gossip, didn't complain, just showed up, did the work, and noticed when others were struggling. One slow Tuesday, Mateo found himself helping a new dishwasher figure out how to stack the fragile dessert plates without cracking them. It was something his own mentor had taught him years ago. Handle them like they're someone's memory, he used to say. As he demonstrated, he caught Elias watching from the hallway, not intruding, just observing with that calm look in his eyes. Mateo felt a strange sense of pride, not because he was being watched, but because, for once, he felt like he was doing something right. Word started to spread among the crew. Mateo's got his head back in the game, someone said during prep. Even helped Rosa with her knife cuts yesterday. Rosa, the newest line cook, had been fumbling with julienne carrots for weeks. Now she moved with more confidence. Elias noticed the shift too. He'd been coming to this location for 6 weeks now, blending in as just another overnight cleaner. No one questioned him. Janitors were invisible by design, seen but never really looked at. That was the whole point of his experiment. What most people didn't know was that Elias Thorne, the real Elias, had built this restaurant group from a single food truck 20 years ago. He'd grown it into a chain of 12 locations, but lately, something felt off. Profits were slipping. Employee turnover was high. Customer reviews mentioned rushed service and cold staff. The board wanted to cut costs, close underperforming spots, automate more roles, tighten the screws. But Elias had always believed that a restaurant wasn't about the menu or the decor. It was about the people in the back, the ones who showed up tired, worked through pain, and still made sure your salmon wasn't overcooked. So he'd done something no CEO in his position would ever consider. He'd traded his suit for a janitor's uniform and walked into his own business as a stranger. At first, He'd seen what he expected: burnout, shortcuts, frustration. But then he met Matteo, and watching him slowly pull himself together, not for a bonus or a promotion, but simply because someone had offered him a cup of coffee and a clean towel, that changed something in Elias. One night, as he wiped down the walk-in cooler, he overheard two servers talking. "Did you see Matteo stay late to retrain the new guy on the fry station, even though he had that doctor's appointment?" Elias paused, rag in hand. He hadn't known about the appointment. He made a mental note. The next evening, he arrived early and left a small paper bag on the back counter. Inside, a banana, a granola bar, and a bottle of electrolyte water. Nothing fancy, just fuel for someone who forgot to eat. Matteo found it during his break. He stared at it for a long moment, then looked around the kitchen. No one claimed it, but he knew. He started doing little things too. Left an extra stack of clean rags by the mop bucket. Made sure the janitor's closet had fresh paper towels. Once he even brought in a thermos of his abuela's cinnamon tea and left it on the utility cart with a sticky note. For cold nights. Elias drank every drop. Meanwhile, corporate headquarters buzzed with tension. The quarterly review was coming up, and the Harbor Grill location was on the chopping block. "Customer satisfaction is below threshold," the operations director had said in the last meeting. "Staff engagement scores are the lowest in the region. We can't keep pouring money into a sinking ship." Elias sat silently through it all, his face unreadable. Inside, he was wrestling with something deeper than spreadsheets. He'd seen the exhaustion, yes, but he'd also seen Matteo patiently showing a nervous busser how to clear plates without clinking. He'd seen the dishwasher laugh for the first time after Matteo made a silly joke to break the tension. He'd seen people start to look each other in the eye again. That wasn't a sinking ship. That was a crew learning to sail together again. But could that be measured in numbers? Could it save the restaurant? One rainy Thursday, the head chef called in sick with the flu. Panic rippled through the kitchen. Without him, there was no one to oversee the specials, manage inventory, or approve the final plates. The sous chef looked ready to bolt. Matteo stepped forward. "I'll run the line," he said, voice firmer than he felt. "I know the recipes. I've been here long enough," no one argued. They were out of options. That night, Elias stayed later than usual. He didn't just clean, he watched. Matteo moved with purpose, calling out orders, checking temps, tasting sauces. He corrected a rookie's seasoning without shaming him. He even sent out a free dessert to a table that had been waiting too long, explaining it to the server with a shrug. "They've been patient. They deserve it." Elias leaned against the hallway wall, arms crossed, heart heavy with something he hadn't felt in years: hope. After closing, as Matteo wiped down the grill for the third time that night, Elias approached. "You did good tonight," he said quietly. Matteo let out a tired laugh. "I'm just trying not to mess it up." "You're doing more than that," Elias said. "You're holding this place together." Matteo looked at him, really looked at him, this quiet man who always seemed to appear when things got tough. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, almost shyly. "You're just the night cleaner." Elias met his gaze. "Maybe," he said. "But everyone matters. Even the ones no one sees." Matteo didn't have an answer for that, but he felt it deep in his bones. Back at corporate, the decision loomed. Elias knew he couldn't stay hidden forever, but he also knew that if he revealed himself now, everything would change. The trust they'd built, fragile, real, human, might vanish under the weight of titles and power. So he kept mopping, kept listening, kept leaving small kindnesses where they'd be noticed but not questioned. And Matteo kept showing up, not just for the job, but for the people in it. He started arriving early to help prep, stayed late to walk new staff through closing duties, even organized a quick team huddle before service. "We got each other's backs tonight, yeah?" The kitchen didn't magically become perfect. There were still burnt dishes, missed orders, moments of frustration, but something had shifted. People smiled more, said please and thank you, took a breath before snapping. Elias watched it all, heart full, mind racing. He'd come to judge a failing business. Instead, he'd found a community quietly rebuilding itself. One clean towel, one cup of coffee, one act of decency at a time. And at the center of it all was a cook who'd almost walked away, but stayed because someone saw him when he felt invisible. That, Elias thought as he locked up the restaurant that night, was worth more than any profit margin. Friday night hit like a storm. The rain poured down in thick sheets, turning the sidewalks into rivers and the parking lot into a swamp. Inside the harbor grill, the air was thick with steam, shouting, and the sharp tang of burnt garlic. It was the kind of night that tested everyone, the kind where everything that could go wrong did. First, the head chef didn't just call in sick, he'd quit. Left a voicemail at 4 p.m. saying he couldn't take the stress anymore. Then halfway through the dinner rush, the dishwasher walked out mid-shift, muttering something about his bus pass being stolen and not being able to afford the fare home. To top it off, the walk-in cooler alarm started beeping. A sensor had failed and half the lettuce was wilting. Panic crackled through the kitchen like static. Orders backed up. A server dropped a tray of drinks near the entrance, drawing groans from nearby tables. The manager paced near the pass, face pale, phone glued to his ear, trying to find backup that wouldn't come. And then, just when it felt like the whole place might collapse under the weight of it all, Matteo stepped into the center of the chaos. He didn't shout, didn't point fingers. He just took a breath, wiped his hands on his apron, and said, "All right. Rosa, you're on fryer. I'll handle grill and sauté. Luis, you run plates and keep the expo clear. Maria, reset that drop table on the house and tell them we're sorry. And someone grab the backup cooler logs from the office. We'll prove everything's safe." His voice was calm, steady, like he'd been waiting for this moment without even knowing it. The team hesitated for just a second, then moved. Not perfectly, not magically, but together. From the hallway, Elias watched it all unfold. He'd arrived early, sensing the tension in the air even before the first customer walked in. Now he leaned against the wall near the janitor's closet, mop in hand, eyes sharp behind his glasses. He wasn't just cleaning tonight. He was witnessing something rare, leadership that didn't come from a title but from care. An hour in, just as the kitchen started finding its rhythm again, the front door opened. Not a customer, but a man in a dark coat holding a clipboard and wearing a city badge. "Health inspector." The manager froze. Matteo's shoulders tensed. Everyone knew what this meant. One violation, just one, and the restaurant could be shut down on the spot. The inspector didn't smile, didn't say hello, just nodded toward the kitchen. "I'll need to see your sanitation logs, hand-washing stations, and storage areas." "Full inspection," the manager stammered. "Of course, sir," right away. But his hands were shaking as he fumbled for the logbook. That's when Elias stepped forward. "Logs are up to date," he said quietly, walking past the stunned staff. He handed the inspector a thick binder, spotless, organized, every page dated and signed. Daily cleaning checklist, chemical dilution records, temperature logs for all cold storage. And the sanitizer buckets are freshly mixed, just refilled 20 minutes ago. The inspector raised an eyebrow. "You're the manager?" "No," Elias said. "Just the night cleaner. But I keep things in order." He led the man through the kitchen without hesitation, showed him the gleaming floors, the labeled containers, the separate cutting boards for meat and produce. When they reached the walk-in, Elias pointed to the backup thermometer taped to the shelf, showing a steady 38 degrees. "Sensor failed earlier," he explained, "but the unit's fine. Logs confirm it never rose above safe levels." The inspector checked the numbers, compared them to the digital readout, then nodded slowly. "Looks compliant." In the kitchen, no one dared breathe. Then came the hand-washing stations. One near the dish pit had a slow leak. Water pooled on the floor. The inspector frowned. Before anyone could panic, Elias knelt, pulled a wrench from his belt, because of course he carried one, and tightened the valve in under 30 seconds. "Fixed," he said, standing. "And the spill's been sanitized." He pulled out a fresh towel from his cart and wiped the area clean right then and there. The inspector watched him. Then for the first time he almost smiled. "You take pride in your work." "It's not just my work," Elias said simply. "It's everyone's." 20 minutes later, the inspector left with a passing grade and a note. "Minor maintenance issue corrected on site. Overall excellent hygiene standards." The kitchen erupted in relieved cheers, quiet ones, because service wasn't over. But the tension had broken. After the last plate went out and the final customer left, the team gathered near the expo counter, exhausted but buzzing. Matteo leaned against the counter, arms crossed, eyes closed for just a second. Then he looked up and saw Elias packing his bucket. He walked over. You saved us tonight, he said, voice low. Elias shook his head. You saved us. I just kept the floor clean. No, Mateo insisted. You knew where every log was. You fixed that leak like you'd done it 100 times. You stood up when no one else could. He paused. Why do you care so much about this place? You could clean anywhere. Why here? Elias looked at him for a long moment. Rain tapped gently against the windows. The kitchen lights hummed softly. Because places like this, he said slowly, they're more than buildings. They're where people find their footing, where they learn to trust each other, where someone like you decides to stay instead of walk away. He met Mateo's eyes. That matters. Mateo swallowed hard. He thought about the last few weeks. The coffee, the towels, the quiet presence that never asked for anything in return. He thought about how, without Elias noticing, he'd started believing in himself again. If it weren't for you sticking around, Mateo said, voice rough, I would have walked out weeks ago. Elias didn't look away. Then I'm glad I stayed. They stood in silence for a while. Two men who'd found each other in the middle of a storm neither saw coming. Later, as Elias pushed his cart toward the back exit, Mateo called out, Hey, same time tomorrow? Elias turned, gave that small, familiar nod. Wouldn't miss it. And as he stepped out into the rain, Elias felt something shift inside him, not just as a business owner, but as a person. He'd come to judge, to decide who was worth saving. But tonight he'd been reminded of something he'd almost forgotten, that real strength isn't in control. It's in showing up for others, for the work, for the quiet moments that no one sees but everyone feels. Back inside, Mateo turned off the grill, wiped down his station one last time, and hung up his apron. Tomorrow would be hard again. But now he knew he wasn't alone, and sometimes that's enough to keep going. The staff meeting notice went up on the bulletin board Tuesday morning, unusual since they rarely had all-hands meetings unless something big was happening. Mandatory, 3 p.m. sharp, conference room. No details. Just that, whispers started before lunch. Are they closing us? Did someone get fired? Maybe it's about the health inspection. Mateo tried not to think about it. He'd been off since Sunday, catching up on sleep and helping his sister sort through medical paperwork. But his mind kept drifting back to Elias, to the way he'd handled the inspector like it was nothing, to the calm in his voice when everything else was falling apart. He'd texted him a quick thanks again on Monday, but Elias hadn't replied. Not that he expected one. The man wasn't big on words, still something felt off. At 2:50 p.m., Mateo walked into the conference room. Most of the crew was already there, servers in wrinkled uniforms, cooks still smelling faintly of fryer oil, the dishwasher who'd come back after Mateo tracked him down and offered to cover his bus fare for a week. Everyone looked nervous. Then the door opened, and in walked Elias, but not the Elias they knew. This man wore a crisp navy suit, polished shoes, and carried himself like someone used to walking into rooms and having people stand a little straighter. His hair was neatly combed, his posture confident. The quiet janitor was gone. In his place stood a man who looked like he belonged in a boardroom, not a back alley with a mop bucket. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone dropped a pen. Mateo's stomach dropped like a stone. Elias didn't smile, didn't fumble. He walked to the front of the room, placed a leather portfolio on the table, and turned to face them all. I owe you an apology, he began, voice steady, but softer than expected. And an explanation. He took a breath. My name is Elias Thorne. I founded this restaurant group 22 years ago, and for the past 2 months I've been working here as the night cleaner. Silence. Thick, stunned silence, then murmurs, disbelief, a few nervous laughs. You're the CEO? The manager finally choked out. Elias nodded. I came here because our leadership team was considering closing this location. Customer scores were down. Staff turnover was high. On paper, it looked like a failing business. He paused, scanning the room. But I wanted to see it for myself. Not through reports, not through numbers. Through your eyes. He looked directly at Mateo. And what I found wasn't failure. I found people who showed up even when they were hurting, who helped each other without being asked, who kept cooking, cleaning, serving even when no one was watching. Mateo's throat tightened. He remembered every late night, every burnt dish, every moment he thought no one noticed. But someone had. I watched Mateo step up when the kitchen was falling apart, Elias continued. I saw Rosa stay late to practice her knife skills. I saw Luis cover 3 stations in one shift without complaining. I saw all of you choose kindness over chaos again and again. He turned to the whiteboard behind him and picked up a marker. So I'm not closing this restaurant. I'm rebuilding it. He wrote 3 words in bold letters. Culture, care, community. Starting next month, this location becomes our pilot for a new company-wide program. We're investing in better training, fairer schedules, and real career paths, not just for managers, but for everyone who works here. He looked at the dishwasher. That includes dish pit staff. He looked at the servers. And front of house. Then back at Mateo. And we're creating a new role, kitchen mentor. Someone who trains new cooks, supports the team, and helps shape how we run this place. That role goes to Mateo. The room erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned emotional silence, then slow building applause. Mateo felt tears prick his eyes. He hadn't asked for this. Hadn't even imagined it. Elias waited for the noise to settle. I didn't do this because I'm generous, he said quietly. I did it because you reminded me what this business was supposed to be about. Not profit margins, not speed. People. He stepped down from the front and walked slowly through the room, making eye contact with each person. You've been treated like cogs in a machine. But you're not. You're the heart of this place, and from now on, you'll be treated like it. After the meeting, no one left right away. They stood in small groups, talking, laughing, some even hugging. The manager pulled Mateo aside. I had no idea, he said, shaking his head. All this time? I thought we were just hanging on. We were, Mateo said. But maybe we were also building something. Later, as the crew trickled out, Elias lingered near the door. Mateo approached, unsure what to say. You could have just sent an email, he finally offered. Elias smiled. Really smiled this time. Some things need to be said face to face. Why me? Mateo asked. For the mentor role? Because you lead without needing a title, Elias said. You help without keeping score. And you stayed when it would have been easier to leave. He paused. That's the kind of person this place needs. Mateo looked down, then back up. Will you still come around? As, just Elias. Elias chuckled. I'll always be Elias, suit or no suit. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small key. This unlocks the supply closet. Starting tomorrow, you'll need it for your new station. And he handed over a folded piece of paper. This is the first training outline. Your ideas go in the blank spaces. Mateo took it, fingers brushing the paper like it was something sacred. One more thing, Elias said, turning to leave. Don't change. The kitchen doesn't need a boss. It needs you. And with that, he walked out. Not as a CEO making an exit, but as a man who'd found what he'd been looking for all along. That night, Mateo didn't go straight home. He went back into the kitchen, stood in the quiet space, and just looked around. The grill, the prep tables, the pass where he'd sent out hundreds of plates. It all felt different now. Not just a job, a place where he belonged. Outside, the city hummed on, but inside, for the first time in a long time, there was peace and the promise of something better. Not because someone handed it down from above, but because a group of ordinary people had chosen, every day, to care, even when no one was watching, especially then. 6 months later, the Harbor Grill didn't just feel different, it felt alive. The same brick wall stood, the same kitchen layout remained, but the energy had shifted. Laughter spilled out from the back during prep. Servers greeted regulars by name. Even the smell in the air seemed warmer, less like stress and burnt oil. More like garlic roasting slow and bread baking fresh. Mateo stood near the expo counter, clipboard in hand, watching a new cook plate a salmon dish. He didn't step in right away, just waited. The young cook adjusted the garnish, stepped back, then nodded to himself, just like Mateo had taught him. If it doesn't look like you'd serve it to your own family, he'd said during their first training session, don't send it out. Now, the plate passed without a word. Mateo gave a small thumbs up. The cook grinned. This was his new rhythm. Not just cooking, but guiding. Not just surviving shifts, but building something that lasted. He still wore an apron, still worked the line on busy nights. But now he also ran weekly team huddles, mentored new hires, and even helped design the updated training manual, filled with real tips, not corporate jargon. How to stay calm when the printer jams, one section read. what to do when you burn your third steak and why it's okay. And every Tuesday at 9 p.m., without fail, Elias showed up. Not in a suit. Not with a title. Just in a clean button-down shirt and quiet shoes, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the shop down the street. He'd sit at the staff table near the back, and Mateo would join him after service. Sometimes they talked about the restaurant, new hires, menu tweaks, how the Culture First program was rolling out to other locations. Sometimes they didn't talk at all, just sat in comfortable silence watching the team clean up together, no one rushing out the door. One evening, as rain tapped softly against the windows, Elias slid a folder across the table. "They want you to speak at the Leadership Summit next month," he said. "Share what you've built here." Mateo shook his head. "I'm not a speaker. I'm a cook." "You're both," Elias said gently. "And people need to hear this, not as a success story, but as a reminder. That real change starts with how we treat each other when no one's watching." Mateo looked around the kitchen. Rosa was showing a new dishwasher how to stack glasses without clinking. Luis had brought in homemade tamales for the team. Even the manager, once all nerves and clipboard, now asked, "How's your sister doing?" Every Monday. This wasn't a turnaround. It was a homecoming. The story of what happened at Harbor Grill never went viral. There were no flashy headlines or dramatic before and after reels. But word spread quietly. In staff break rooms, in late-night diner conversations, in job interviews where someone said, "I heard they actually care about their people there." Applications poured in, not just for any job, but specifically for this location. People wanted to work where they wouldn't be invisible. One afternoon, a young woman walked in during lunch rush, soaked from the rain, asking if they were hiring. She'd just moved to the city, had no experience, but said she'd do anything. Dishes, mopping, whatever. Mateo looked at her tired eyes and remembered his own first day. "We're not hiring dishwashers right now," he said. Then he paused. "But we could use someone to help prep vegetables after school. Part-time, flexible hours." Her face lit up like he'd handed her a lifeline. Later, Elias found him in the walk-in, organizing produce. "You gave her a chance," he said. "She reminded me of me," Mateo replied, stacking carrots neatly. "Scared. Trying to prove I belonged." "That's how it starts," Elias said. "One person seeing another. That's all." They didn't talk about the past much, the burnout, the near closing, the nights when everything felt hopeless. It wasn't needed. The proof was in the present, in the way the team covered for each other during emergencies, in the handwritten thank you notes left on the manager's desk, in the fact that turnover had dropped to 0 in 6 months. One Friday, after a smooth but packed dinner service, the crew gathered for their weekly reset meeting, not about mistakes, but about what went well. Luis handled that angry table like a pro, someone said. "Rosa's knife speed is insane now," another added. Then Rosa spoke up, and Mateo stayed late again to help me practice the new dessert plating, even though he had that doctor's appointment for his sister. All eyes turned to Mateo. He just shrugged. "She's doing better. And you're getting really good at that chocolate curl." Elias, sitting quietly in the back corner as he often did during these meetings, felt something warm settle in his chest. This was what he'd forgotten, the quiet pride in a team that lifts each other up without being told to. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Mateo handed Elias a small jar. "My abuela's hot sauce," he said. "She heard about you. Said anyone who drinks black coffee and fixes leaks deserves her best batch." Elias unscrewed the lid, took a cautious sniff, then laughed. "Smells like trouble." "Only if you're not ready for it," Mateo said with a grin. They stood by the back door for a while, watching the city lights flicker on. No grand speeches. No dramatic music. Just 2 people who'd found each other in the mess and helped each other build something real. Months turned into a year. The Culture First program expanded to all 12 locations. Mateo traveled to 3 of them, not as a trainer but as a listener, learning from other teams, sharing what worked, always coming back to the same truth. People thrive when they feel seen. And Elias? He still showed up every Tuesday. Sometimes he mopped a little just for old times' sake. The staff teased him about it. "You sure you're the CEO?" But they saved him a seat at the table anyway, because titles didn't matter here. What mattered was showing up, staying, caring even when it was hard. One evening, as Mateo locked up after closing, he paused under the restaurant's sign, Harbor Grill, and looked up at the warm glow in the windows. It wasn't just a place to eat. It was a harbor, a safe place to land when the world felt rough, and he knew, deep down, that it wouldn't have survived without a quiet janitor who saw more than a broken cook. He saw a person worth believing in, and sometimes that's all it takes to change everything.